be broadcast on the YouTube stream.
All right. So, hi, I am Linda Heitzman-Powell, and I serve as chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Allison Bell.
Here.
Kelly Harrison.
Here.
Emily Kessler.
I think she was unable to attend the meeting today.
Yeah, I wanted to give her a chance just in case she popped in though.
Great.
Pamela Neidert.
Here.
Christy Marie Steele.
Here.
Stephanie Wiley, otherwise known as Nikki.
Here.
Mike Williams is not available. And Alice Jean.
Here.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning the meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals had requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On December 15th, 2023, we sent notice of the meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice is also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allow members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we experience any technical issues during the meeting, you may send the email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we began. There is no one currently on the conference call line.
Thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. So one of the things that I have to say is that the University of Kansas or the K-Med Center system has been experiencing disrupted Zoom meetings. And so if I jump off, it automatically reconnects me. So just wanted to throw that out there in case that happens. All right. So the first agenda item is the approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented or a request to modify any agenda items.
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. The agenda is approved as presented. So now if you all will look at the minutes from the last advisory committee that we had on December 8th. And when you're done reviewing those, I'll entertain a motion to approve. or modify?
David, can you let Allison and Christy back in by chance? They just messaged me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go Zoom. He said they're working on it.
Okay, and yeah, they should be back in the meeting now.
All right. Hi. So, we're reviewing last, meeting's minutes. So if you'll review those, that's where we're at right now.
Oh, do you need a motion to approve the minutes, Linda?
I do.
I motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kelly. All in favor, signify aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. All right. David, we would like you to now provide your executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Linda. It is an exceptionally busy time, so I will go to three primary topics. First, some agency operations, then some items of note from the past board meeting on January 12th, and then some legislative updates. First, starting with operations, there have been a number of improvements over the last year that the state has been making to assist agencies in terms of their infrastructure. Not all that work is very visible, so I just wanted to highlight three different topics. The governor did direct state agencies to put together a continuity of operations plan last year. And I know a lot of entities have a version of this, but this was a pretty robust process where agencies were directed to work with the Department of Emergency Management and really identify key responsibilities and then staff members to fulfill certain roles. And then looking at, if something dramatic did happen that would impact state agency operations, how could you relocate to a new facility? What is the bare essentials you would need in terms of resources? And so it was a really good exercise, but it did take some time working with their staff, and we put together a lot of information for that continuity of operations plan. Each submitted plan was scored, and you had to receive a score at a certain level to get it approved. And I'm happy to report that our submitted plan was approved. So we'll probably do some additional work with their employees this year to make it even better, but we're in good status in terms of our continuity of operations plan. Now, make no mistake, if there was something that really would impact our ability to do operations here, it would be a very big challenge no matter what, but at least we have identified some of those resources and potential locations where we could start agency operations again should something like that happen. Another item that they have been making some improvements on is building security. I believe that there was sort of an assessment of state agency buildings, and there's been a number of changes to some of the facilities here in the buildings around the Capitol complex. And so some of those are visible changes, some of them are not, but a lot of positive work being done on that front too. And then IT security. There was some issues that were highlighted earlier this year with the judicial branch. And so the state is looking at other agencies, and Legislative Division of Post Audit has been doing some IT audits of certain features. The state is also looking at some other areas as well. And so making some improvements in IT. So we just wanted to highlight some of those for you. I know they're not the most visible things, but they will make, I think, things more secure and better in the long run. Another item in terms of operations that I think is particularly interesting, and it relates to an item later on in the topics we're going to discuss today, but the Social Work Advisory Committee had requested drafting and release of a survey back in December of 2021, and it was to collect input and feedback from licensed social workers in the state of Kansas. We were able to collect feedback from over 1,000 social workers at the time. And what they were asking about previously were topics that involved things like supervision and any issues involved with certain topics related to the social work profession. That survey was well received, and the members wanted to go ahead and collect data on some new topics this year. So I've been working with their advisory committee, and we put together a 14-question survey that was sent out last Friday, and it will close at the end of the day today. And there are currently about 8,292 social workers that are licensed in the state of Kansas. And we had sent that out to all those individuals and tried some techniques to remind people about the survey and get individuals to provide feedback. So last time we did the survey, we got about 1,000 responses. So far, as of right now, we have received feedback from 2,570 people. So a much bigger response this time around, and really happy to see that feedback. I have not taken a look at the individual responses yet, but I'm looking forward to doing some work on that over the weekend and putting together a report for that advisory committee. What they were asking about this time had to do with some topics related to supervision, but more specifically supervision by televideo. Now that some things have been opened up in recent years to allow the supervision to be done by screen, has that been something that has been showing a lot of positive success stories, or has it resulted in some challenges or some issues related to people receiving supervision or the quality of the supervision potentially? Or has it really helped in a number of different ways? So we're asking individuals who provide the supervision and also those who receive it. There's also legislation on a proposed multi-state compact for social workers, and we wanted to collect feedback on if that passed and was fully implemented. Would individuals be interested in switching from a single state license, which is what we currently have, to a model with a multi-state license, which is what the compact would propose? So under that compact, you would be able to get a multi-state license in your state and then be able to practice in all other compact states. And so we asked individuals, if we were offering that at a higher fee, would you be interested in switching, assuming the compact is passed and implemented? But wanted to get information on that to get an idea of potentially how much to set that fee at. We are not looking at this compact as a way to raise money for the BSRB. It is more to mitigate the loss of revenue for people who live outside of the state that currently hold a license. One of the unique things about this compact is that because of the new ability for states to issue a multi-state license, there really wouldn't be the same motivation for individuals living outside the state to continue to get a Kansas license going forward. So that would really change the way that we quantify workforce and look at licensure. Right now, I mentioned we have about 8,292 people who are licensed in Kansas at the social work level. About 1,794 of those individuals live outside of the state of Kansas. So over 20% of our social work licensees don't live in the state of Kansas, and losing license renewal revenue from almost 1,800 people would be a challenge for balancing agency operations. But that is why a multi-state license would be at a higher fee to kind of mitigate some of those costs. So, but that's another topic that survey is looking at. And then it's also looking at their licensing examination. There's been some conversation about the test to become a permanently licensed social worker. And so we wanted to collect some feedback on the importance of that test, and then also about continuing education and changes in that area as well. So happy with the response so far. Looking forward to getting to work on that report for that advisory committee. But in order to receive that number of responses, we did sign up for a plan this year that would allow us to receive up to 15,000 responses to surveys, and we have no limit on the number of surveys we can provide, which means we are able to offer this same opportunity to the other advisory committees if the advisory committees would like to collect feedback from their licensees on those same topics or other topics this year. So something to be thinking about, but it is always nice to be able to collect feedback and data, and so we can analyze that information. Another item as far as agency operations, we are trying to take a next step forward in terms of transitioning from an agency that stores records in paper form to an agency that stores records in electronic form. We are going to be seeking approval to be able to store items electronically, but right now we are doing some preliminary scanning to make sure that our scanners are of a good quality, that we are able to store the information that we need to in a way and identify it. And so we're doing some initial scanning right now in preparation of seeking that approval, but just looking to take a step forward in that process. And then another item in terms of operations, Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager, and we set up meetings with schools, usually in the spring or the fall, and that gives us an opportunity to talk about how to prepare for the application process and seeking licensure. We also discuss items relevant to unprofessional conduct and how to avoid any issues with disciplinary items. And then we talk about some of the tools on the BSRB website and other resources we have available to help people out as they prepare to become a professional in these areas. And so we have a number of those on the calendar already. Since I have been with the agency, most of those have been over Zoom, originally because of the pandemic, and then schedules do get tight, but trying to make more of an effort this year to visit some of those schools in person and really build more connections on those campuses and speak to some students directly. So looking forward to those opportunities. And we are trying to make new contacts with some of the programs if we haven't visited those programs in the past. So we're trying to reach out to some additional individuals to see if we can put more of those appointments on our calendars. Switching now from operations, I want to make you aware of some items from the past board meeting that took place on January 12th, 2024. The board received public comment from Tanya Rickliff. She is the board president from the Kansas chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. And Ms. Rickliff did request support for the Social Work Multi-State Compact if it was introduced in legislative form this year, and it has been at House Bill 2484. The board did have an opportunity to ask some questions and then discuss that topic. One of the items to be resolved with that compact has to do with how much to charge for a multi-state license. So the fees related to the multi-state licenses would be something to be figured out. The second item is that this is another one of the compacts that requires individuals practicing under that compact to have passed a background check with fingerprinting. And many other states do require that as a condition of licensure, but currently the BSRB does not require that as a condition of licensure, but we have authority to begin that process. It's just not something that has been fully required for individuals. And so, but because the compact does require it, individuals wouldn't be able to practice unless they have accomplished that item. And so we have started having conversations with the members of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and KBI has informed us that the background checks cost about $50. We're looking at moving forward to see how we could get that up and running. Should the compact pass and become operational, how those individuals would be able to submit the information for the background check and get that done. That $50 I talked about, that's not operating revenue for the BSRB, it's a pass through to KBI, but it would be an additional cost to individuals practicing under compacts. So the board did choose to support that legislation, and when it had a hearing recently, I presented proponent testimony on behalf of the BSRB at that hearing in front of the House Health and Human Services Committee. Another item the board reviewed at that meeting was a possible agreement with a company called CE Broker. And I think I might have mentioned them in the past. That's a company that partners with state licensing boards. They have already reached an agreement in Kansas with the Board of Healing Arts and the Board of Nursing. And I believe within the past year or so, both of those had launched working with CE Broker. But basically, it's a company where licensees would be able to opt in and at basically no charge, but they would be able to get an account with CE Broker and upload their documentation of continuing education and essentially assign it in certain areas. And so if you were assigning your ethics hours, you could basically put that your document for this CE goes towards these ethics hours here. And then the other hours would go towards the general hours. And then if you are selected for audit, rather than the current process of sending those documents back and forth with the BSRB, we would be able to log into the portal and then verify that documentation and then complete the audit for you much more quickly. Also, to licensees' benefit, they wouldn't have to hang on to those paper records like they currently do for that amount of time. It's not required, but for the agencies who've utilized it here in Kansas, that has been a helpful tool. And so the board was supportive of that. I am working with our legal counsel to flesh out all the terms of the agreement, make sure that there is nothing of issue there. And then also working with our IT provider for the state to make sure that any information that would be shared in a confidential way. So looking at moving forward on that, but there's still a couple items to resolve. And then the other two items I want to make you aware of, the board did pass a delegation motion that should help with the time frame for certain applicants for licensure. Currently, right now, if someone applies to the BSRB and they attended a school that is not accredited by the national accrediting body for their profession, we frequently need to bring in an outside expert to review the coursework or the program that they attended to ensure that it is substantially equivalent with what is necessary for licensure in Kansas. And so that process can take some time. And ultimately, we get a report from that expert who gives an opinion on whether the program or coursework meets the requirements in Kansas. And then what we've been doing is taking those reports to the board to review at a closed session under the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act once a month to approve that person to move forward in the process, either to become licensed or to be able to take the test to become licensed. And so the board found that if there is a report by an expert and the report was positive and the BSRB licensing staff found no further issues, the board thought it would be appropriate to delegate that to the BSRB to be able to move forward rather than bringing all of those cases to the board under CAPA and having to wait at times a few weeks until the next meeting. Now, if there were issues that required specific board approval, such as past felony convictions, or if there's anyone who would be considered as a denial of licensure, those would still all go before the board to make the final decision. But this should allow us to move forward with some of those expert reports on cases where there just needed to be a few things resolved. And then we can move forward once we get that report back if we see no further problems. So happy that that's now in place. And then the board reviewed one final item at that meeting. We started a discussion about the board's licensing system. Currently, right now, we work with a company called System Automation, and our licensing system is hosted by another state agency, the Board of Healing Arts, and we get some support from that agency. Last year, there was a bill passed by the Kansas legislature to create a unified license verification portal. And as part of that bill, the state started to set up a enterprise licensing system for any state agencies that wanted to switch to a new provider under the state system. And since that time, there's been about 6 or 7 agencies that have expressed an interest and have said, we want to switch. So Acela is the company that has that agreement, and a lot of those different groups have started the process of switching over to go under the state system. The BSRB has an opportunity to also be a part of that group. So Acela will be providing a presentation to the board at the March board meeting to let the board ask questions and kind of see some of the benefits of maybe the system that they can provide. And when switching between licensing systems, the biggest cost sometimes is the upfront implementation cost. However, there was money made available over the last couple of years for some technology modernization and upgrades related to the pandemic. And so it is possible the BSRB may be able to qualify for those implementation costs to be paid for using that COVID-19 money. And if that is the case, that would be a nice incentive if the system is something the board would support. So more information probably to come, but the board should be reviewing some information on that new potential system at the March meeting. Now switching to some legislative updates. First item concerns the BSRB's budget. So every state agency each year goes in front of both the House and the Senate separately to have the budget reviewed by both chambers. For the BSRB, we are not an agency that receives any money from the state general fund. However, by statute, we contribute 10% of all revenue we receive back to the state for operations to help fund other tasks the state pays for. So what the budget committees do for the BSRB is they review how much the agency can spend for a specific fiscal year from July 1st through June 30th of the following year. And we usually have a few years that are being considered at once. We have the existing year, which is fiscal year 2024, and then also next year, fiscal year 25. We already have a budget that has been approved for both years, and so we were asked to bring back any revised changes for those years to the legislature to examine. So in the Senate, we went before the Senate Transparency and Ethics Committee. They asked questions about the agency's budget, but ultimately decided to recommend what the governor had recommended after reviewing our budget, which was the same amounts we had requested. And so that has moved forward to the Senate Ways and Means Committee. And then earlier this morning, they recommended what the agency had requested. So the next step for us on the Senate side is for our budget to be included in the overall Senate appropriations bill and then passed on the Senate chamber floor. For the House, we were reviewed by the House Higher Education Budget Committee, and they had a number of questions about the agency. We do have a budget of roughly about $1.1 to $1.2 million every year. The balance in our fee fund is a little over $2 million. And we currently operate at a deficit each year. So we spend more than we bring in terms of revenue. And that was by design by the board. A few years back, the board put in some pretty aggressive fee decreases to application fees and also renewal fees in an effort to draw down the ending balance of the BSRB fee fund over time. And so we had told them that between last year and this year, the balance in the fee fund has gone down about $143,000, but the budget committee expressed some concern about it still being over 2 million. And they added a notation in the report that asked the agency to bring back a report by February 29th with any recommendations to lower fees further to draw down the ending balance more quickly. And so that was passed out, but there were no changes to the amounts for either year. And then that moved to the House Appropriations Committee, and that was reported out by the chair of the Budget Committee on Wednesday of this week. And the number of the members of the committee asked questions about the recommendations, but ultimately decided to concur with the Budget Committee's recommendations. So there's no changes to the dollar amount, but to be responsive to the Budget Committee's request for that report, the board has scheduled a special board meeting on Monday of next week at 8 o'clock. And that'll be for an opportunity for the board to discuss the budget for the BSRB, looking at some of the fee decreases over the years, the current balance, and then to discuss potential future adjustments to fees in response to the recommendation by the Budget Committee for the House. So that meeting will take place virtually on Monday from 8 to 9 o'clock. Moving next to regulations. So in general, during this part of the legislative session, what we're talking about is statutory changes, and those are items in bill form that will be passed by the different chambers and then signed into law by the governor, and that affects the statutes. Under the statutes, once the framework is defined by law, the agencies have the ability to flesh out the requirements and regulations. And so the BSRB has been in the process of submitting regulatory changes for about the last year, year and a half in some of these areas. That process can take quite a bit of time. Once we have those drafted, they have to be approved by the board, but then they're submitted to both the Department of Administration for review and edit and comment, and then the Attorney General's office. And we have no control over the time frame for the review of those entities. But if they request any changes, we have to be responsive to that. And then if the Attorney General requests changes, it has to start that process all over again and go back to the Department of Administration. So as I mentioned, some of these have been in the works for quite a while, but happy to announce that just recently, about 11 different regulations received approval for us to move this forward to the next step. So they were published in the Secretary of State's publication, the Kansas Register, on January 25th, and they are now held open for a time of public comment for 60 days. And then following the conclusion of that, there's a 1-hour public hearing at the BSRB office on Tuesday, March 26th. We usually don't have anyone attend that official public comment meeting, but it is open to the public if anyone wants to present additional feedback at that time. Of course, they can submit written comments before then, but that is an opportunity for us to kind of close that part of the process. And then once that closes, the board will be able to review any comments and also to formally adopt any changes to the regulation. There was also a legislative committee that reviews those proposed changes. It's the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, and Leslie Allen and I attended that meeting last Friday on February 2nd. They had a number of questions about some of the proposed changes. So we'll bring those to the board. Most of those had to do with sort of the committee was expressing a desire to have more terms defined and to understand more clearly some of the terminology that was included in the regulation. But we tried to answer their questions as best as possible, and then we'll be taking that feedback to the board to consider when they vote on the regulation. And then the last item I just wanted to highlight here. So I try to track the items that are on the legislative calendars in terms of bills that are moving through the process. I try to make the board aware of any items that would involve mental health topics or also substance use topics. And so I will highlight some bills here. If you have any questions about some of these bills, the best way to review the information is probably to go to the Kansas Legislature's website. But hopefully this will kind of put them on your radar if there is a topic of interest. So I'm going to go through a few bills here quickly, but if you would like clarification on the bill numbers to look them up later, just let me know and I'm happy to highlight them. So there was a bill that was heard earlier this year that would involve mental, emotional, and behavioral health treatment to medical services that may be provided to a child alleged or adjudicated to be a child in need of care. That was House Bill 2580, and that was heard on January 31st in the House Child Welfare and Foster Care Committee. There was a bill that dealt with expanding the definition of peer support counseling session in the rules of evidence, and that was House Bill 2557. It received a hearing on January 30th in the House Judiciary Committee. There was a bill that would provide that programs and treatments provided by a certified community mental health clinic be granted a renewal certification if such programs and treatments have been previously certified or accredited. That is House Bill 2570, and it received a hearing on January 30th in the House Health and Human Services Committee. There was a bill requiring the Secretary of KDAS, or the Department for Aging and Disability Services, to reimburse counties for certain costs when a person is in a county jail awaiting examination, evaluation, or treatment for competency and other provisions on jails. That was Senate Bill 228, and that received a hearing on January 30th in the Senate Judiciary Committee. There was a bill that would add for-profit entities to the definition of a qualified applicant in the Kansas Fights Addiction Act. That is Senate Bill 307, and that received a hearing on January 30th in the House Appropriations Committee. There was the bill that I mentioned earlier that would add Kansas to the Social Work Multi-State Compact. That was House Bill 2484, and it did receive a hearing on Tuesday, January 23rd in the House Health and Human Services Committee. Also of note, that bill is scheduled to be worked by the committee on Tuesday of next week. And when I say worked, that's the terminology that usually we say when a bill is scheduled to be voted on by the members of the committee. In most cases, when they work a bill, it tends to be that they want to move it favorably out of committee, but they also have the opportunity to vote on any possible amendments or changes to the bill at that time as well. Another item would codify the Mental Health Intervention Team program administered by the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services and state statute. That bill is House Bill 2669, and that received a hearing on February 8th in the House Health and Human Services Committee. There's another bill that would create a statewide drug abuse resistance education, or a DARE program educator position, and establish the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Fund and provide funding for such fund by annual transfer of state money. That is House Bill 2613, and it received a hearing February 8th in the House Education Committee. There is a bill that would require certain persons on a third or subsequent conviction of driving under the influence to create or to participate in a multidisciplinary model of services for substance use disorder. That bill received a hearing in the House Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee on February 1st and was worked earlier this week on February 6th. And then there were three more bills that were recently introduced. They have not been scheduled for a hearing, but I thought they would be of note. The first would be a bill that would add licensure for art therapy. and that is House Bill 2756. And it was introduced on February 7th and assigned to the House Health and Human Services Committee. There is a bill that would exempt military members and military spouses from paying occupational licensing fees, and that is House Bill 2745. And it has not been scheduled for a hearing, but it has been introduced. And then the last bill I wanted to highlight was a bill that would focus on transparency and prior authorization act to impose requirements on the use of prior authorizations in healthcare. And that is House Bill 2713. As with the other two, it has not been scheduled for a hearing, but it just recently was introduced. I wanted to put it on your radar. So hopefully some of those bills are of interest. If you do want to kind of track their movement, the legislature's website is a good place for that. But I just wanted to highlight those. But I've been trying to monitor any bills relevant to the mental health fields. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Did you mention House Bill 2751, the KDAD's authority on licensure? That one seems paramount to this group as well.
2751. I don't think I had it in my list.
I can read the summary that CAN Advocate sent out. It basically says that Leah Keck from KDAD's confirmed that it's their bill. Essentially, the bill aligns KDAD's licensure authority for providers of disability services 39 to 2001 with Kansas Administrative Procedures Act.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that was introduced. It looks like it was introduced on Wednesday of this week. And
I think we're meeting on it right now. They said it was going to meet on it today. So
yeah, it looks like on the legislative calendar, it's been scheduled for a hearing on Monday at 1:30 in the House Health and Human Services Committee.
Allison, would you send that? I was going to say drop it in the chat, but I don't think we can drop stuff in the chat on this meeting. Could you send that to David so he could send it out to the group? So that
absolutely, I'll just, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for catching that one. You know, I try to use some tools to try to follow things, but when things come up very quickly and then get scheduled for hearing almost immediately, it is very challenging. But yeah, thank you for.
Sorry, David.
No problem.
Does anybody else have any questions? I have some questions. I don't want to derail the meeting because we've got a lot of stuff to cover and we want to like knock some of this stuff out. Might be quick questions. David, you know that you were talking about the social work and that what 10%, 20% of them were outside of Kansas. Do we have that same mechanism in place for behavior analysts? Like, let's say they're in Missouri and they want to practice in Kansas and they're doing telehealth or something. Do they just fill out the licensure the same as they would if they were residents? That works? Yeah, Leslie's shaking her head.
Yeah, most states require licensure if you want to practice. I guess I would say this: most states look to the location of the client when the client receives services. And so, if you want to provide services to a client that's physically in a state, most states say that you need to get licensed here. And I think that's led some of the professions to have individuals with 5 or more licenses and different sets of CE responsibilities and different things like that. So
yeah. Well, I was just checking to make sure that they didn't have to have a valid Kansas address in order to be able to apply for licensure here. No, okay. That was one thing. The next thing is on the survey that David mentioned, that is under new business, item 6E. No, not 6E, 6D. So that's something that we can talk about. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get to that today. And then Pam, David, because you are holding those meetings with academic programs to be able to talk to students and faculty about how to be able to get licensed in the state of Kansas. I think last time, is that something that KU would be interested in, Pam? And if so, who does David or Leslie reach out to?
That's a good question. I can't, I recall the conversation, Linda, from before, but I don't know that we did anything formally in terms of an actionable since then, did we, David?
I'm not sure. But we're happy to schedule
Yeah.
something. So,
So recap that again for me, Linda.
It's just one of the things that David and Leslie have done is reinvigorated the BSRB's outreach so that the licensing process is like transparent. This is, what you need to do in order to be able to be licensed. And they've been going out and proactively meeting with academic departments or students so they can ask questions about the process. And it just seemed like something, as we're relatively new to the licensure domain in terms of, healthcare and mental health and behavioral science, behavioral health, that it would be something that might be of interest to the students in the program. So I just want to make sure that behavior analysis is represented in those outreach activities.
Understood. Given that there are several disciplines, I think in which that would be involved in the BSRB licensure, it probably would be per academic discipline, like within the departments and units. But I'm happy to like drop that in somebody's ear and find out if there would be a more centrally, a central unit that could do that. I'm assuming you're envisioning like graduate students or undergraduate and graduate.
Yeah, and so, like as people are going through their course sequence, they can get their master's degree along the way so that then they can get their BCBA,
Yeah.
even while they're students still, right?
Sure.
Or they could be a BCABA. And, I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, one way to go, David and Leslie, we could do that specifically given that the Applied Behavioral Science department is its own department at KU. If you wanted to meet and come up with some sort of action, whether it be you come and talk or could do like a professional seminar or ways to spread the word with respect to behavior analyst licensure, we could at least start there and then talk about what to do for the other disciplines, psychology, that sort of thing.
yeah. And I was just looking at our calendar here. I think we do have a presentation set up for the KU counseling psychology students. I think Kristen Hensley is our contact on that one. So that's scheduled
Oh,
for
that's awesome.
February 29th. So that's when we have that one on the calendar right now.
And sorry to belabor the point, but are you coming to present or is there a presentation? Is that what you mean? Or when you say it's on the calendar, what's happening?
Yeah, so what we've done in the past, at least for most of them, they've been over Zoom, and we have about 45-minute presentation where we talk about basically what the BSRB is, and just kind of introduce ourselves that way, and then talk about sort of the steps people should be mindful of as they're approaching the license application process. And then we talk a little bit about, some of the fees that are involved when you're going through that and the timeline. And then I usually present some information on the unprofessional conduct regulations for the profession to help people be mindful of their responsibilities and how to avoid disciplinary issues. And then we kind of wrap it up with highlighting some resources on the website and even tell them about meetings like this, that if they're going to become a professional, it would be good to be part of the conversation and be mindful of what's being discussed by the regulatory board. So it's pretty good. We've done most of those over Zoom, but we're trying to get more in-person presentations this year. So as long as there's no conflicts and we're able to do it, we've been trying to set some of those up in person.
That
Is there
that
something-
sounds that sounds awesome. And I will say we have a standing time slot on Fridays from 3:30 to 5 where the department has a professional seminar. And I know that we have some dates open at the moment. Would that be something you all could do?
Yeah.
I'll email you after the meeting what dates are open and maybe we can at least start there. That would be fantastic.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Is this something you can also recommend for other universities? Sorry, WSU also has a psychology program. It has a behavior analysis program that I think would be beneficial to have that done it as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So does Pitt State down in Pittsburgh, Kansas.
I don't have a contact for that one. I think you might, but I do have a contact. So
yeah, and I think we actually just spoke to a group of students with Wichita State, but it was in the social work area, and that was I believe that was earlier this year or it was this week on Tuesday. It's kind of been a full week, but that was a good presentation that we had earlier this week. So
they have a newer behavior analytic course sequence, so I think it would just be. I'll get you in contact with one of the professors for the course sequence, and you guys can work it out.
perfect. Okay, thank you.
What about Kanzaba?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say too. Yeah, it sounds like something that would be really beneficial for the members of Kanzaba. And I think it would have to be done via Zoom because we're spread out across the state. But I think you'd get some attendees.
I wonder if there could be a time that he could present at the conference.
Yeah.
Like a lunch, a lunch.
Yeah. So maybe not this year because we've already set our schedule this year, but in future years we could kind of the same way we used to have Mike Wassmer come in and talk. We could do something like that. Yeah.
We also have that town scheduled during lunch, so that might be a good opportunity to have another person. Although a lot of the members of Kanzaba are already going to be licensed, so they might already know the licensure.
I don't think that's true.
Actually, a
lot
of student members.
Yeah. A lot of student members, and we're trying a lot, like our initiatives are to get people involved who are not at the BCBA level as well. So I know we have to keep working in that area to get people who are not yet certified. But I think if we get something on the books, this becomes a new resource that Kanzaba can offer. Maybe it will interest people who are not yet certified as well. So should I reach out to you, David, to set that up? Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we do some of this work, but we don't really, I kind of highlighted a little bit here and there, but we're really trying to take another step forward and reach some of the programs we haven't connected with in the past. So yeah, if you know anybody else or if there are other programs that you are in contact with, feel free to just refer them to me and we can start taking a look at some of our availability and put some more meetings on the calendar.
And I think it's really good that we're like getting engaged in this as a group because, we still are really new in this whole process and being licensed by the state and all the regulations that go along with it and the whole process, right? And really what it requires. And there's still not a lot of pre-service information that's disseminated to our learners about the process of how they become a professional once they're done with their stuff. So I think this is a really good advocacy activist event, process that we can be involved with. And so I think that's kind of exciting. We're maturing as a field. So thank you, David, for that report and for answering those questions. Does anybody have anything else on what David presented? No? All right. So
go ahead. Linda, I want to ask you, because David presents a very objective summary of what's going on, which I completely understand his role. You're also part of these meetings, and I'm wondering if you have any additional input on kind of what's coming down the line or what the board is working on, and your perspective on anything that might significantly impact our population, our behavior analysts.
One of the things that I did want to talk about when we got down under new business and the survey topic, because I'm still really interested in making sure that we are represented on the board, that if we could use that survey as a mechanism to collect some data that could then be taken back to a legislative session to say, here's the number that we have, here's the number of responses, here are the number of people that feel like it's important for adequate representation. But I was going to talk about that a little bit later. I think there's other things that are some of the legislative stuff that's coming out that we've been, and we talked about it a little bit last time, that we were, because of the advocacy that everybody in this community engages in, we were able to get behavior analysts listed as other qualified mental health professionals for that new CBI program that's coming down the pike. So I just really think that we've got a good mix of activists and, people that are engaged in the regulatory process, right? That then helps govern our field as a whole. So the more engaged that we can all be, and the more we can continue to recruit people that have the bandwidth to be able to engage, I think the more represented we're going to be. So that's sort of my global take on it.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Did you have something, Allison, that you wanted to?
No, I was about fingerprinting, but I'll wait till later. I don't think it's important for right now.
Do we want to add that to the agenda? Like if we don't get to it today, to make sure it's added to the agenda for next time?
That's fine. It was just about the location of fingerprinting, because when I've had to get fingerprinted for Missouri previously, I had to go to Missouri to get fingerprinted. So I just want to make sure that that's not going to stay the case if we adopt fingerprinting here.
David, when we discussed that at the broader meeting, didn't they say that you could go to the post office, or that there were several places mentioned that were open for fingerprinting?
I do recall some comments along those lines. This is sort of a new area for me, so I'm not sure exactly how that process works. I know that there's some different models. I think there is a way to do like electronic scanning of fingerprints, and then there's the traditional ink-based fingerprints. And so I'm not sure what the widely accepted usage is now. I know some people from agencies have purchased machines and used those. Other times people have directed individuals to go to certain places for them. So I think we're kind of at the starting point for that in terms of us implementing something, but I can take a look and get more feedback from at least some of the agencies that are already using it to see what they do.
It was several years ago that I had to do that, so hopefully the technology has caught up, but I just wanted to make Missouri.
It might be like a and thing where it's like you have to get it done by a state worker in Missouri and then have it sent to Missouri NBI. So maybe David and Linda, you can just kind of note it, that kind of looking out for if folks will have to be physically in Kansas, whether it is the post office or the police department, in order to get that fingerprinting done for Kansas Life, or if they could do that out of state and there's a way for them to do it remotely, because that could be a major barrier for folks if they have to physically be in Kansas to do that step.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah, because we do have, I told you about the number of social workers who live outside the state of Kansas, and that's not exclusive to social work. I think we looked at psychology, and I think at least that same ratio of psychologists that were licensed here lived in other places too. And maybe some of those individuals travel and like to practice in different states at different times of the year, but some of them may just be doing telehealth. So if you do have to be here for that, that's something we definitely want to work through and know.
Yes, exactly. And with COVID and everything being a lot more remote, I think it could be even more important than it has been in the past.
All right. Perfect. All right. So the next agenda item is old business. Thank you very much, Christy, for drawing our attention to the fact that we were missing some documents. So if you all could open up the combined unprofessional conduct regulations. So 5A and 5A1, I believe it is. 5A. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I
I think
know
they're
that the
both listed
correct
as
names.
5A on this, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, 5A. So open those up so we could look at it. David, is there one you would like to draw our attention to specifically to
Um,
start with?
You know, I think most of the conversation on the proposed changes was wrapped up at the last meeting, but there were a few items I think the advisory committee wanted to circle back around to.
Telehealth.
And Christy was nice enough to send some proposed language. And so if it's okay with you, I'll just go ahead and share my screen here
Yeah, go
and just pull up
Christy.
that document. And then Christy, if you want to kind of talk about that language, that might be helpful, I think.
I'm just gonna pop in to say I need to jump off to for
Okay.
another meeting, but thank you all. Nice to see everybody. See you
Thanks,
next
Pam.
time.
Hi, Pam.
Bye, Pam.
Okay, so David, what you said matches my memory as well, that we've wrapped almost everything up, but I had these 3 areas that were addressed in other fields, and I thought could be helpful to consider adding to ours as well. And so that was related to having an alternate custodian if you are incapacitated, so that they can take over your practice or have access to records. The other was social media, and the third was telehealth. And so what I did is just pulled the direct quotes from the different fields licenses, and then I picked one that I thought made the most sense for us and suggested that we add that. So that's what's highlighted in yellow. But of course, that's a discussion for us to have as well, but just to kind of streamline the process if helpful. So the first one is record keeping with an alternate custodian. So addiction counseling has a clause: if a practitioner is the owner or custodian of the client records, it is the practitioner's responsibility to identify an alternate custodian of the records in the event they are incapacitated or pass away unexpectedly, and there is no custodian of their records. And then licensed psychologist also has a similar statement. It's just slightly different. So with that, I'll open it up to folks' thoughts on include anything referencing this at all, include this exactly, include a modified version. What do you guys think?
Well, here's what I think right off the bat. I like your suggestion, the first where it's highlighted in yellow. However, the only thing I'm going to say is that this is unprofessional conduct, and so things are framed in the negative. Am I correct, Leslie and David?
Yeah, I think you're right. Most of them are situated that way, but I think we could probably just modify the phrasing so that it would be matching the style of the other one.
So it would be something like, if a practitioner is the owner or custodian of the client's record, failure to identify, sort of like in the psych one, failure to identify an alternative custodian of their record in the event they are incapacitated, blah, blah, blah. Is that what you're saying?
I think that would help match the style. Yeah, I think that would be good. And I think that would keep the essence of this language here. It would just match the style.
Yeah. So it would be replacing, it is the practitioner's responsibility with failure to identify. And of course, if they're incapacitated, would be the only time that would kick in. So
and you might want to just have it you know, you might want to just keep that beginning language too.
yeah, if a practitioner is the owner or custodian of the client records, failure to identify an alternative custodian.
Mhm.
So you'd be replacing it is the practitioner's responsibility with failure.
Yes. I think that's one way to do that.
And it's only because it's not our professional standards, it's unethical conduct.
Okay. should I go to the next one or do we need to
Do
motion?
we have to vote?
Let me stop sharing for a second and make sure we still have quorum. We do. So basically what we could do is you could vote, or another thing you could do is you could say, if there's any opposition to this, please say there's opposition. If not, it would be adopted by consensus of the advisory committee.
Okay,
Another method.
so is there any opposition to the suggested language as highlighted on the provided documentation with the modification that it is the practitioner's responsibility? Replace that phrase with failure. So do you want to highlight that section, David, that, yeah, right there? It would be replacing that language with failure.
There's not a clean way to really add the word failure, but basically, yeah, if you just add the word failure in there,
Yeah.
is the owner or the custodian of their client records, failure to identify an alternate custodian of their records in the event they are incapacitated or pass away unexpectedly, and there is no other custodian of their records.
Do I hear any opposition to that? All right,
I realize
go ahead.
that I suggested this, so sorry, but also I want to throw out there, like, is this a best practice or is this a minimum requirement?
Could you clarify?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So previously we've talked about this is unprofessional conduct. This is kind of bare minimum professional conduct violations, not best practice. And this clause of a practitioner identifying an alternate custodian of the records if they're incapacitated or pass away, is that a best practice expectation, or is that a bare minimum professional conduct expectation?
I think it's a bare minimum expectation as exemplified by other helping professions, inclusion of that language in their regulations. That
Okay.
would not be exceptional to our field.
Sounds good.
And I think that's a protection for clients, especially if you have an independent person. Now, if somebody works at a company, that's one thing. But if you're going to be an independent provider out there in the field, I think it's a bare minimum that you have somebody else, even if it's your attorney, that is an alternative custodian so that they can ensure that those records get passed on to somebody else.
Got it.
But I appreciate you bringing that question forward, Christy. I think that's a good topic for the committee to discuss.
Yeah. And that's only my opinion. You guys can all have different opinions if you want. Is there anybody that does not think that that's a bare minimum? Or does everybody agree? Does everybody agree with it? That? Yes?
I agree with
Definitely. It's definitely part of like insurance contracts and things like that anyway, that you have can't remember the exact word. The enforceability of this though, when they pass away, there's not gonna really be any consequences for them. So I think that's the only consideration there.
A posthumous
Yeah,
violation.
they're getting their licensure revoked after death.
Yeah.
Now
Sorry.
it would be helpful if someone just skip town and let their
Yeah.
license expire, and then in the future wanted to come back and practice again. It would be something for the board to resolve to make sure
Right.
they were accountable for this. So you're right. In terms of someone passing away, nothing really you can do. But in terms of abandonment of records, there is some room there.
Yeah. So, So not to get, could you share your screen again, or do you want me to?
I've got the screen here.
So something along these lines, Allison, is this what you're thinking? To identify an alternative custodian of their records in the event they are incapacitated or otherwise fail to ensure.
I think we already have a
Consumers.
clause
Huh?
abandonment. So I think we already have a clause about client abandonment. And so maybe we just take away the pass away unexpectedly,
Yeah.
or we could just incapacitated unexpectedly.
I'm good with that.
Or I guess it could be like an emergency, no longer able to practice unexpectedly.
Sure.
Unexpectedly.
So I have a question. So then are we expected to identify someone, kind of like having a living will or something, power of attorney, whatever that is? Like we always have someone identified, like in case we are in some situation that someone can step in.
Yeah, if you're in it, and that's important if you're out there practicing independently, if you're working for an organization, sort of like you're at Katie Med Center, they have access to the client records, right?
Yes.
So it's a non-issue. But if you're out there practicing independently and you're the only one that has access to those records, and then all of a sudden you're incapacitated, or unexpectedly, or whatever. How are those? This is a protection so that people that are licensed understand that's important for continuity of care, to ensure that client records are accessible in the event that they are incapacitated or otherwise unable to provide those records. But if we do have the abandonment thing in, do we want to say are incapacitated or otherwise unable to provide access to those records? Or just leave it like this? I'm good either way. So
Oh, well, I guess never mind. I'm the one that suggested it, so I won't share my opinion.
I can't think of another reason why you, besides abandonment, that you would be unable to share records outside of being incapacitated. Like, is
Right.
there an other there?
Maybe someone got into the prison.
Wouldn't I feel like that's incapacitated? Maybe not.
That's true. That's true.
That's what I was trying to think, like if I go camping and get lost for 2 weeks, but I think I would still say that's incapacitated. I don't know. I'm always in favor of doing other in things like this as well, though. I think it helps, I don't know, blanket cover anything that could come up, but I can't think of another.
all right, so are we good with it as it stands? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so by consensus, David, that's adopted.
Okay.
All right, Christy, you want to move on to social media? You're on the hot seat today.
No worries. Okay, so social media, marriage and family therapists, and professional counseling both have clauses. The one I liked the best was marriage and family therapy. So they added practicing inappropriate boundaries with clients with regards to the use of social media, including but not limited to using a personal profile to connect or communicate with clients on any social media platform, and disclosing confidential information through public social media.
Yeah. The only question I have on that is, well, number one, would it be something like failure to maintain appropriate?
Mm-hmm. That sounds good.
Okay. And then this was a bigger discussion, I think, or a discussion at the bigger meeting. Is there a time limit on that?
Well, we could say current clients.
Yeah. How does
'Cause
that
they're-
sound to you guys? Sorry, Chris.
Oh, Chris, to finish your thoughts.
I was just going to say that in terms of the ethics code, there you can't have sexual relationships with past clients for a certain period of time, but there's nothing about like being
Personal.
friends with your clients or being like developing friendships or engaging socially with your
Social.
clients after you're no longer providing services.
So as it stands with the insertion of current in front of clients, so it would be failure to practice appropriate boundaries with current clients with regards to the use of social media, including but not limited to. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
Does the original document that this is being added to define clients? Or do we know what that definition is?
Good question.
That is a question. Leslie,
I'll look up, I was gonna say, I'll look it up in the definition regulation and see if it's defined.
Okay, thanks.
Good question, Kelly. I think it, and of course, you know, I might be confusing it with psychology as well, but I feel like someplace there the client is defined.
In 102-8-1, the definition regulation, client means a person who is a direct recipient of applied behavior analysis services.
Direct recipient. Okay.
Yeah.
So that doesn't include families then, because they're not.
Well,
the
they would be
client.
considered a recipient of the services, right?
Considered a direct recipient.
Do you
Think
do parent
so.
training? Yeah, you do parent
Yeah.
training with them. Yeah.
The insurance would argue that that is still a service to the client, but it's fine. I just think the word direct in there is a little, because it also should include the rest of that. Sorry, she just found any person who's a client, supervisee, or student, because BACB includes supervisees as clients in that definition.
You didn't read the second.
Oh, any person who has a significant relationship with the client or the relationship is known to the licensee. And that the relationship, sorry, can't read.
So Allison, what you're suggesting is to add in any person who has a significant relationship with the client as well, so that it's covering both like the minor,
Yes.
that you're providing services to, plus like parents, caregivers,
Mm-hmm.
siblings.
And if our current client doesn't include supervisees, it probably should.
Would that be this is a question. Does that fall under the purview of the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board with ensuring the safety of clients? Or does that fall under, because there's a separation between professional conduct and how you engage with your people who you are responsible for their education and training versus people that could potentially that are receiving therapeutic services, which is under the purview. I don't know. This is a question I'm asking Leslie and David.
I don't know that I have a great answer for your question. There is some language in the other unprofessional conduct regulations when you talk about, I think, dual relationships that
Right.
do reference things like students and supervisee. And I am aware that some of the associations have some additional language when it talks about close familiar relationships. But I don't know. You bring up a good point in terms of how far these unprofessional conduct standards would extend when you're no longer dealing with a client or someone that you have a direct connection with. I just don't know that I have a clear line to, these are good questions to be discussing. I just don't know that I have a great position on them. Leslie, do you have any other thoughts on these?
No. I would agree with you.
So because I think it is included in that dual relationship one. But that, since it is included in there, then I think it probably would be appropriate to have it in here as well. Because if we're going to define that in the dual relationship, then it should also be covered under the social media clause, which says failure to practice appropriate boundaries with clients, comma, those who have a significant relationship with that client, comma, or those who are in a subordinate, in a supervisory position, a supervisee position, such as students or supervisees.
I don't necessarily know if I was recommending that we add that to the social media specifically, or just in general as part of the definition of clients. It was more of a like discussion point around this is how the BACB defines client. Is that what we're talking about when we're talking about the definition of client?
So I think that's a different question then. So that would be, Leslie, are there ways to change? I think if it's going to be, if it was changed in the definition, then this would state clients, but are we allowed to change are we allowed to change those definitions, Leslie?
Yes, it's the definitions are a regulation, just like the one you're working on now. So if you change the definition of client, it would directly affect how this, was looked at. So anytime the word client is used in your act, that's what it refers to in the definition.
Which then means, Allison, that if you look at the one that we just agreed on, then that also means that everyone has to make sure that any of the records related to your supervision, your supervisory activities, also have to have another custodian of their records identified. And they have to have access to those records.
I may have over this. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it does kind of create a little bit of a domino effect, and I am not sure as far as the other regulations, if they have references to the words client. If you do want to change it, going back to the definition section, it would have implications potentially to the other regulations that may use client in certain contexts. And so it's
Well, that's
probably
5 minutes ago before I said that, and then started again. So that
it's a good question. It just some things to be thinking through. Probably worth looking a little bit deeper into some of these things if that's something to move forward with.
I was looking at the other professions and they almost all say a direct recipient. That the client is a direct recipient of services in the different professions. That may be why yours is worded the way it is.
So then stick with the language that says failure to practice appropriate boundaries with clients, others that have a significant relationship to the client, or supervisees, students or supervisees of the licensee with regards to the use of social media, etc.
I don't know that students and supervisees need to be in this one, and that's okay if that's an unpopular opinion. But if we're thinking like best practice versus minimal requirement,
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it feels different. Like the
Right.
crossing that boundary with a relationship with a client seems detrimental. Crossing it with a supervisee could be, and then maybe it gets into what an appropriate boundary is as well. But
Have to define which social media platform, because I'm definitely going to be social media friends on LinkedIn with RBTs or others that I've interacted with versus like my Instagram account or my TikTok. Like those are I feel like those are different platforms that have different purposes that, so I don't know.
But they're all covered by social media.
Yeah, so I think we leave out this. I agree with Kelly on leaving out the supervisee, but it is something that in the future we may want to think through the implications of, but not today.
Yeah. And also just thinking about that dual relationship, like, when we go to school, like, we're not only supervisee, but we're also, friends or whatever. So I just felt like that's going to make it too complicated.
All right, so the suggested language then would be failure to maintain appropriate boundaries with clients or others that have a significant relationship with the client with regards to the use of social media.
We're going to add a current clients, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
Thank you for remembering that.
I do think that language about others with a significant relationship with the client might be a little troublesome. I mean,
because that could be their doctor.
well, or I was thinking their lawyer,
Yeah.
so I know it's intended to be a family type connection usually, or something similar to that, at least in the context of this conversation, but I'm just not sure of the wording. I just think existing, yeah.
I mean, that's the language that we pulled from the dual relationship piece. So if we have a problem with the word significant, we have a problem with, we need to go back to the dual relationship one too, because that language is already on there.
Yeah, I think maybe we can probably go ahead and use it. I think when the board is reviewing these, we'll have legal counsel for the board look through the language as well. And so maybe that would be a good level to kind of make sure it's all synced up.
Okay. All right, did you get our proposed changes there?
I think so, but we also have the video from this meeting too. So
Okay.
our minutes
So
take
insert
into it. So
in a nutshell, insert current in front of clients, and then others with a significant relationship. It could say caregiver or something, but the significant relationship with the client.
and that appeared to go to number 54, and then separately it looks like there's also the item 55.
I just want to say I don't like the word caregiver because I mean that should include like their siblings, the other tiny humans in the house, like all of that whole family basically. So whoever has a significant relationship with the client.
Yeah, right. Yes. And so then would it say like to include disclosing this includes disclosing confidential information through public social media? And I've seen that. I've seen people on Facebook say stuff like, oh, I was so-and-so, was in Special Olympics, I've worked with him for 4 years or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like, don't do that.
Pictures of humans too. So
yeah,
I mean, that's their face is confidential information as well. So
yep. So do we just roll that in? Is that, instead of having 54 and 55, that we just roll that in that says on any social media platform, including the disclosure of confidential information. Is that appropriate?
Well, I think there's two different aspects. There's like engaging with clients inappropriately, and then there's sharing client information to the public. To me, they feel like two separate.
Well, and we said on their personal profiles, so people are going to try to use that little caveat of, well, it was on my business profile that I shared their information. So is it still like, I think they're two separate things too.
So having two
No, because it has the disclosing confidential information on a public social media. So I think we need to leave that phrase there.
right, but what I'm trying to get at, if there's two separate things here, do we have two different regulations regarding the use of social media?
Sorry, this is just me not knowing. Isn't 54 one and then 55 a second one?
Oh, it may be the way that it's in there. I would look at it as one regulation regarding the use of social media. I probably would have put in enter and, you know, and done another regulation. How does that work, Leslie, David?
I mean, I think they're okay to include as separate items. In the official language, they would probably be on separate lines, but
Okay,
it should be fine. We can kind of adjust it in the format before we provide it back to the board.
okay. And so then how would that second one be phrased? Failure to maintain.
I'm not sure that you need to adjust the language on that one.
Okay,
Because it should say the following would be considered unprofessional conduct, and then it would just say disclosing confidential information through public social media. So that one,
okay. I'm good with that. That makes more sense to me than trying to wordsmith it to the negative.
This is a social media question. Is a private account still considered public social media? Like if I have my Facebook private and I post something?
It's a good question.
I personally would think so, because I don't even do that. I don't do social media just because I don't want anything that has anything to do with me out there online. But you know, that's me. I don't do Facebook. I don't do LinkedIn. I have accounts, but they're inactive. Right? They're just there.
Private and public social media,
Or just take out public and through
just
social
through
media.
social media.
Yeah,
like that.
I like that too.
I have a question. So, like for example, Facebook, right? You can message people. If someone like message parents because parents prefer to be contacted that way, is that considered as using social media to communicate?
I would say yes, blocked.
Because
It's not a HIPAA compliant method of communication either. So like that's just, you're asking for like 87 different problems to do that.
and the thing is, there's programs out there like Bright Wheel that has a secure messaging system that is unique to the agency. And then within the agency, it's unique to individual families. You know, we use that at the kids' place. So there's, you know, systems that are developed for that, that's not really considered social media. It's a communication. And then, you know, even with regards to like emails, anytime you communicate with somebody, it really should be like encrypted.
Gosh, I felt like this is like a can of worm in some way. Like I'm not totally related to social media, but like, you know, sometimes people communicate with the clients through personal cell phone number.
Yep.
That happens quite a bit. So
it does happen quite a bit, and I think people should stop it. But, that kind of stuff is, yeah, you know. And if you have a signed consent that this is the form of communication that, how does that work when you have a signed consent? And then there's always systems like the KU Med Center system that has started to adopt texting through our EMR to be able to reach clients because that's their preferred means of communication.
I'm going to throw out a comment here, and this might be opening up a can of worms too, because this is kind of a tricky subject. We were talking about the use of the word public in this existing text, and it's a disclosing confidential information through public social media. But I don't know the original language when they were discussing it for the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee was necessarily about disclosing confidential information when using all social media. I think it was about disclosing the confidential information publicly through social media. So it makes me wonder if instead of just striking the word public, perhaps the word public should follow confidential information. So it would say disclosing confidential information publicly through social media. But I'm curious what your thoughts are as a committee.
I think again, I start to wonder what is publicly. And like to me, it seems more like disclosing confidential information to people who are not privy to that information. But that's the word we need. Which maybe it's just captured already by leaving it as is.
Yeah, it's tricky. Not to say that we have to gear towards the other group's conversations, but it seems like some of the intention behind this, I believe, was, let's say like a Facebook group where people were putting things and posting them publicly, or there was someone who made a post and then people putting things in a comment section where other people could see it. But you bring up a good point, in terms of what it really is public and what it's not. So
I think Alice's point is a good one. If I am messaging someone through Facebook Messenger, I don't know that I would consider that publicly giving away confidential information, but it is using a non-HIPAA compliant platform to talk about confidential information. Therefore, it could be hacked and I can't think of the word, disseminated publicly by accident, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do I hear that we're going to leave it as is, or we're going to strike public?
I vote to strike public.
I agree.
All right. So do I hear any opposition to that? All right, David, by consensus, we've agreed to the language in 54 and 55 as it relates to the use of social media.
Okay, that sounds great. And then the next item had to do with telehealth. And Kristen, to talk about that language.
Okay, last one. So I think with social media and telehealth, like everything in there already applies, but this is almost like just so you know, it's still, HIPAA still applies with social media and still applies with telehealth kind of thing. So I didn't write who this first one came from, but someone that's not us and not professional counseling. Oh, maybe I adapted it. So this is my adapted version. That's why there's no title. So professional counseling had a version. My suggestion is if engaged in distance counseling, failure to fulfill these requirements, informing the client of risks and benefits of distance counseling or services, disclosing the possibility of technology failure and providing alternative methods of service, and then taking appropriate steps to encrypt or ensure the security of confidential client information or any activity which protects confidential client information from risk of privacy breach.
I do ask that we change it to like services instead of counseling, because it probably came from counseling and that's why it said counseling. But
any other thoughts?
I like changing it to services instead of counseling. And is it informing the client of risks and benefits? if we're working with, if we're doing protocol modification via distance-based technology, is it informing the
Recipient of service.
recipient of services?
And also probably their legal guardian,
Yeah,
right?
that's what
Thinking
I'm
like,
thinking.
like a child, I'm not going, I can inform them of the risks and benefits, but it's really their parent that needs to know.
So maybe informing the client or the legal guardian?
So I think now this is where, like, so if we are defining client as the person receiving the direct services, and that is including the family, like, are we getting too nitty gritty with it? If it's like, it depends what the actual service is at that moment.
Mhm. So
I
informing the
agree.
client and or legal guardian of risks and benefits of distance-based services? I mean, telehealth is here to stay. It's not going away.
I mean, what is the definition of client at this point? If it does include, their significant relationship people, then that's not necessary to specify.
It doesn't. I think it's the direct recipient of the services. So if you've got a 2-year-old on the other side, it's the 2-year-old, right? Even
Okay.
though the family is engaged. So informing the client and or legal guardian.
Mm-hmm.
Is everybody good with that addition? I see everybody nodding their heads except for Christy and Allison.
We are the trouble.
We are the troubled children. We are so sorry.
I'm thinking about, I feel like this client conversation is a much larger conversation because we also talk about getting consent from the client. But if it's a minor, of course, you're not getting formal consent from the minor. You're getting it from their parent, their caregiver, their legal guardian / caregivers. And so if we're gonna get really specific about who is a client and who is a legal guardian, we probably have to comb through all of these again and make sure that when it says client, we mean the minor or adult client received, like that the insurance is through, that you're directly supporting. And if not, then we're saying also legal guardian and potentially caregivers if it's an adult who doesn't have a legal guardian but is being cared for
Or has power of attorney.
Yeah. So I just feel like it's getting a little messy, or if we're clarifying it in some places but not in others, then it just might be.
It opens the door for issues if we have it like super clarified in one section but not in this other one. Does that make sense?
So to me, I think it works, at least for for the social media and the telehealth. If we're thinking about it as like, so if the client is the person in the moment who is receiving the direct services, for social media, that still works. It would be like, sometimes that's the family, sometimes that's the child. And in those, because that is the situation that is at hand, I'm not going to engage in social media contact with any of those people. In this case, though, it's a little bit different because what I think we're adding is that we want to inform the client and somebody in addition to the client in certain situations. So we are going outside of that definition of the client by adding a legal guardian. Now, in some cases, the legal guardian is the client, and therefore you would meet both of those requirements with one person.
I agree, Kelly. And just because we're adding it here doesn't preclude us from looking at some of the other areas that we think clarity, that we would benefit from additional clarity. But for the purposes of this telehealth clause at this point, I think it adds clarity to say informing the client or the legal guardian of the risks and benefits.
And maybe it's like, and the legal guardian, if applicable.
Is there anything, Leslie and David, about and or if applicable, that we need to be aware of?
I'm not sure how that works in regulation. That
Yeah, I'm not
language.
sure either. Sometimes they're kind of picky about language and they like certain styles, but I don't know.
Okay. I like it that we stump you guys.
Asking really good questions.
Yeah.
My thought is, I think it's good to clarify, and I like the addition if we're also committing to going back through everything and making sure that when it says client, we mean direct client, and assessing whether it needs to be added, because just
Informed consent from each client or client's legal representative or representatives, like having that statement in there for those.
pulling up the current version, it's client, 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 client everywhere in terms of consent, description of services, description of possible effects of proposed treatment, financial interests, and of course, you're not going to be discussing financial interests with a 2-year-old. So if we clarify it one place, then it opens up room for inaccurate interpretation later on of, well, they clarified it here where it says legal guardian, but it doesn't say that anywhere else. And I don't know that anyone would argue that, but it would certainly seem confusing to me if I was trying to understand exactly what regulations I was being held to.
Yeah, I agree. I think like based on the definition of client right now, for this telehealth clause, it makes sense to put in legal guardian. And the fact that we are having that conversation probably means we need to go back through and make sure that we have used client in the same way across the entire document.
I agree. And so by putting it in here, that does not preclude us going back and reviewing it, or by using it in a way in the other regulations doesn't negate us putting it in here in order to clarify, because we're talking specifically about the telehealth code.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, I think I'm starting to get some inquiries from board members to have these all finalized. And so I know there is kind of a push to make sure that we're ready, but I also know that it's important for us to get this right. And this is something that we just kind of have been talking about for the first time today. So just kind of want to let you know about that. But I think we should be okay to maybe do a little bit more work on this. So
I think it would be like we put it in here. Allison, you said, I should have interrupted when you first said it. You had some language that you said just a minute ago. And from what I heard, I sort of kind of liked it instead of what? Did somebody hear her say that as well?
Probably from the unprofessional conduct when we were looking at the
I think it was this.
Was it each client or the client's legal representative or representatives?
Yes. That language.
It's
I
from
like that.
Unprofessional conduct regulations. So
it's Q.
Yep. And it's on a couple of other ones too.
Yeah, so I think that's the language that we should put in there. And then I think I'm hoping I'm not wrong by saying if we put that language in there and that's the language that we would like as a clarifying clause to other appropriate sections where it says client, then it seems to me that might be, sorry, Leslie, would that be something that you could look through and make that change, that addition on some of those other areas where it's appropriate? Or is that like a lot? Is there somebody there that could do that?
I guess I don't know that I'm the right person to determine where it's appropriate because I'm not, I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't know that I mean, I guess I don't understand, when it would just apply to the client and not the client's representative. I mean, I would think that would be almost everywhere, wouldn't it? If it's a minor client?
Yeah, but which is why, since we work across the age span,
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's appropriate, and a lot of, and we're also working with a group of individuals often in our clinical practice that may not always have the cognitive capacity to understand
Mm-hmm.
the consent process, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
That I think it's important to say the client, because some of them are able to freely consent, and
Mm-hmm.
others are not, which is then when you need their legal representative. So I think both of those are distinct client types that we work with. So, so maybe the suggestion is that we insert that language here, and then David, I don't know, and then finish this discussion, because we only have like 9 minutes left. And I'd like to be able to get this done today. But if you could update these as the unprofessional regulations, and then can you send that back out? And I don't know if there's a way that we can like provide input on this, because our next meeting isn't for 2 months, right?
Right. Yeah, I can put it on my list of things to incorporate all the changes recommended so far. And I can send that out to everyone. We wouldn't be able to have a conversation and discussion back and forth unless we had a public meeting, but I could definitely put that through and then distribute it to everyone so you could take a look at it. There is the possibility of us scheduling an extra meeting if people are interested in that. Or maybe doing an extra hour at a meeting in the future just to kind of clear the schedule of stuff. But
And what's your deadline for us to have this done? Because we all can get in the weeds on these, and we're not as this is somewhat of a foray into being able to create these documents. When we first did the rules and regs back when this licensure law first happened, none of us had any experience with it, right? And now we're getting a little bit more sophisticated. So I think it's a really good discussion. But I also know that we need to be sensitive to when these need to be done.
Yeah, I think there was sort of a goal to get these done originally by the end of the year in December. But you're not the only advisory committee that's finishing work. I think your committee is still doing some last edits, and then the licensed psychology is doing some last edits as well. So
Okay.
I think if we complete this soon, it should be good.
Can I just make an ask or a recommendation that we don't do it before April? So I want to volunteer so bad to go back through the document and put that legal representative in there where it would be appropriate, but with Kanzaba and all of the other things that are going on in my husband might divorce me. So can we plan to extend our, April, June meeting and have like a hard deadline of like finishing it that day and give ourselves a couple months?
I
I know
mean,
that's a little.
I can pull up the document and highlight every place it says client, and you guys can tell us whether or not it belongs there, if that's what you need.
And Leslie, I think we only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm not sure that would be.
And I don't mean today. I'm saying I just
Yeah.
don't want to make the call on whether it needs to be added for each place that says client, unless you want it added everywhere.
I think that sounds delightful, Leslie, because that would, if you did that, it would call everybody would be looking at the same place, right? Because you've got it highlighted. I think that would be delightful if you could do that. Thank you.
And Allison, you did bring up a good point. This is something a little bit later on in the agenda, but we're almost out of time. We do have a meeting that was on the calendar, but in talking to Linda, sounds like there's going to be a conflict with that date. So we'll need to find another day and time for the meeting. But just to kind of resolve these items and then also be able to get through some of the other items in the agenda, and maybe helpful to do a 3-hour meeting instead of a 2-hour meeting. You have such good discussions as an advisory committee. I don't really want to encourage you to cut those short, but at the same time, we'll make sure you're able to move some of this stuff forward. So now I can send out a poll to members between now and sometime in the next few weeks and collect feedback in terms of availability. And then you can date and time in April that has the fewest conflicts for members, if that sounds good to you.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
And then that way, Allison, you can select times that work for you as well. Because it
This
comes
brings
up.
time with Kanzava, with, I mean, even with grassroots, with the legislative session and public comment periods being open, it's just, there's a lot going on in the springs. And so I feel bad that we're already behind on schedule for you, David, but also like the spring just is a busy time.
Completely understand. Absolutely.
And so, so does anybody have anything that they would want to add to B and C? With the exception of encrypt or ensure the security of confidential client information. See, now that would be a case where perhaps if you look under C, that might be a place where client information is singular, right?
Yes, Linda, I agree.
Thank you. Thank you. So,
Hey,
so, and so in A, David, this one would say client or legal representative. And then C would just stay client.
Okay.
Is everybody agreeable to that?
Agree.
yes.
Thank you. All right, so then that's adopted by consensus.
Okay. With
And
the
then-
understanding too, I think the term counseling was going to be changed to services. So distant services.
Yeah, up at the top. Sorry, I was just referring specifically to the client. Yes, change it to distance delivered services.
Yeah, the second counseling in A needs to be changed too.
Where's that at, Alice?
Yeah,
Oh, in A, yes, thank you. That's changed in A as well. Thank you. All right. Done. That's my OCD checklist. I want to check it off.
Well, and I do want to thank Christy for spending time
Yes.
on that. It was greatly appreciated, and my apologies, missed it in gathering the documents for the meeting, but really do appreciate you doing that. That's been a
And
big-
seriously, Christy, because it gave us a starting point to talk about it, right?
mhm.
So 100% thank you. All right. So on that happy note, we have next time we're going to talk about continuing ed and documentation of continuing ed as old business, as well as review what Leslie's going to send out with client highlighted so we can give our input on where it's appropriate and where it's not to add that extra language in there. And then we have several action items under new business for discussion. I really want to get to talk about a survey to be able to send out to our colleagues out in the field. So I really want to be able to get to that. As David mentioned, he's going to send out a poll. Thank you very much, David. And is there anything other than that?
No, I think everything else can carry forward to the next meeting.
All right. Thank you, guys.
And Linda, do you want to do a motion to adjourn?
Oh, yeah. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Somebody.
I second.
All right, thank you.
I was in second as well.
Any opposition to adjourning? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
motion adjourned.
Thank you.
Motion, meeting.
Have a
Good to
good
see
weekend.
everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.